So welcome, I'm Kate, I lead Innovate US, and you are here joining us for 90 minutes, an introduction to Agile project management. As you may remember, if this is a workshop that you've done before, series, it'll be the first 60 minutes is going to be a presentation led by our wonderful folks that I'll introduce in a minute. And the last 30 minutes will be just an off the record question and answer. So we'll record the first 60 minutes. And then the last 30 minutes is really your time just to talk about a project you're working on or ask for additional resources, really have the chance to just engage with these fantastic presenters. As many of you may remember, this is part of a summer series of workshops that we have been hosting over the summer. So we're towards the last step, which is about kind of tying all of these different skills together. And we are really lucky to have two wonderful product leaders with us who both work for 18F, and they'll tell you more about what that is. Sasha-Ann, the only thing I will say here is just has a wealth of experience from many different companies such as IBM, Home Depot, just to name a few. And today she's the director of product management for 18F. And then Sheel is a product manager for 18F and comes from so many different experiences within the government, and then also recently at a really wonderful healthcare startup. Sheel also enjoys woodworking, which we heard about in about 10 minutes ago. So with that, just as a quick reminder, next week we'll focus on how to get buy-in for innovation. It's going to be led by a team leader from the UNDP. And we've also added one additional workshop to be part of the summer series, which is about how to hack your bureaucracy. So take a look for this link after the session, and we hope to see you all there. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand it back to you, Sheel.
Great, thanks, Kate. All right. Hey folks, thanks for joining this session. I'm glad y'all are able to make it. So we're going to be talking about Agile project management. Kind of what I was hoping to cover was just, what is Agile? Why would you want to work in an Agile fashion compared to a traditional fashion? How you can get started with Agile within your organization, because that getting started is always a really hard step. And then just ways to think about working on Agile teams and things that are going well and things that may not be going well. And then happy to take any questions y'all have. Just to kind of get started, I know a lot of folks have already chimed in on chat. I'd love to just understand kind of your backgrounds and where you're coming from in regards to Agile. So, if you can just type in chat quickly, kind of what your familiarity is with Agile, like a 1 if you're totally new, 2 if you kind of know what it is but haven't yet worked on it, and then 3 or 4 if you've worked on it and it's gone well, or maybe it hasn't gone so well. So yeah, thanks. It looks like a few folks have kind of worked with Agile before and it's gone well, but a lot of folks are kind of new to the space. I see Jennifer, you worked on an Agile team, but it wasn't really Agile. So we'd love to talk a little bit about that when we get into Q&A, or you're welcome to kind of share your thoughts in chat too about that. Cool. Thanks. This is super interesting to see. So a lot of new folks to Agile. So I'll spend a little bit more time on that. So maybe I can just jump into kind of what is 18F. So 18F is actually a team inside the federal government. And what we do is we provide technology and design consulting to federal government, state governments, and local and tribal and territorial governments. So what that actually means is we'll basically work with you on a specific problem, typically related to technology, help you kind of understand, unpack that problem, and then help you acquire a vendor to help you solve that problem. We may end up helping you build something to solve that problem, or just kind of build your capacity and do kind of training work with you to then enable you to solve that problem on your own. And we worked with lots of states and local governments. So we worked with Michigan, Vermont, Washington State, among Texas, among others. And then we've worked with a bunch of federal agencies in the past. So Medicaid, so I see a lot of folks from Medicaid on the call. So yeah, we've worked with the Federal Medicaid Agency, the Office of Child Care, the Forest Service, and the Food and Nutrition Service, sorry. and we're federal employees. We're not a vendor who's trying to make money. So our mission and our goal is really to kind of do the same thing that you all are trying to do, which is just deliver good service to the public. I think Kate already talked a little bit about our experience. I won't dive too much into this, but kind of the summary is I've done product development and worked in both traditional and non-traditional project management situations. So I can kind of understand and contrast both of them. And then Sasha just has a wealth of experience across a number of companies. And, she will be helping us with questions at the end. Her voice is a little off today, so she'll mainly be saving her voice for any questions y'all have. So maybe why don't I, before I jump into talking about like what is Agile and why it exists, maybe I'll talk a little bit about the traditional way of approaching kind of big projects in government. So like, and I'm sure y'all have experienced this before, you'll spend a lot of time, maybe even years or months writing a long RFP with a bunch of requirements. You might then end up going out to a vendor to go build or buy something for you. And then that vendor will go away for 2 to 4 years. And then they might come back and they'll show you something and say, here's this thing, does it solve your problems? And that sometimes does. Most of the time it doesn't actually solve the problem that you're trying to solve. This approach has some problems, right? Like you've made a bunch of assumptions. You've assumed that like what you knew at the start of the project and those needs that you kind of articulated at the start of the project are not going to change throughout your project lifecycle. And you've also like kind of this approach kind of assumes that like everything at the start of the project and you can like write down everything that you need to do. And then over 4 years, somebody can do that and it's just going to work. What actually comes of this is like you typically have like delays with your project or protests through your vendor. Both you and the vendor are frustrated. Like no one's actually happy in this situation. Things generally take a really long time. And then by the time things actually go out into production, they're kind of out of date, right? Like if you started a project 4 years ago, we all know technology and software changes, right? Like things move to mobile, people come out with new devices. And so if you've kind of designed and developed for something 4 years ago and you release it now, it's probably out of date. And it's very risky. Like it leads to a lot of failure. And I'm just kind of highlighting some headlines that have of like government IT failures. And this is no one's fault. It's just like the way that this kind of process and the outcomes this process leads to. There's a bunch of problems that kind of states and federal agencies have run into. Healthcare.gov is probably the thing that a lot of people think of when they think of a big government IT failure. Very recently, Deloitte was paid about more than $40 million by the CDC on a no-bid basis to build a vaccine management system for the country during the pandemic. And the CDC was offering that for free to many states to say, hey, we built this thing, please use it to manage your vaccine rollout. What actually came of that was it was largely abandoned. Most states didn't use it. It was unreliable. It was buggy. People couldn't log into the system correctly. There's a fascinating article about this that I'll actually just post in the chat if folks are interested. But it continues to happen. It's not like anyone has really learned their lesson about this. Like if we're following kind of the traditional way of working, like this is the outcome you get. I kind of made some broad assumptions here, or broad generalizations here, but like there's data to prove this, right? So there's a organization called the Standish Group who does like kind of regular assessments of government projects and government IT projects. And kind of what they've seen is only 13% of large government IT projects succeed. And their definition of success here is just like, was the thing done on time or budget? And they're looking at large projects, so things that are 6 million or greater. And it's not just the US, they look in Europe, Canada, and the United States. So they think only 13% succeed. And the definition of success is just like completed, which may not actually account for whether the goals of the project were actually fulfilled at the end, right? And that's just harder to answer. So I'd assume that number is actually lower than 13%. And then the other interesting thing is they found that the larger the project is, the more likely it is to fail. So projects that cost more than 10 million only succeed 8% of the time. And then as you decrease the size of your project, success goes up. So they said that, if your project is less than $1 million, so if you sign a project for less than $1 million, you have a 70% success rate. So big government IT projects generally don't lead to a lot of success. The way that kind of traditional projects kind of follow the process they follow is called waterfall. I don't know if y'all have heard of this in the past, but kind of what you're doing, which I articulated before, is like you write a bunch of requirements. You then spend either your IT team's time or a vendor team's time to like design and then build the thing. And then a couple of years later, you will have something that you can then share with either your stakeholders or your users to kind of verify if it works, release it, and then maintain it. And this is not something that just government does, like private industry does this. When I worked at Microsoft, one of the first things I worked on was a new product. And this was around 2008. So what we were doing is we were going to build something that you would install on your desktop and we would sell via a CD. And it was going to take us 4 years to build this. So we spent 3 to 4 years building this thing. By the time we actually released it, no one actually wanted to buy it. It was a huge failure because everyone wanted their software on the web. And so just us following this approach meant we were so late and we completely missed the mark that we spent 4 years essentially not succeeding and spending a lot of time and effort on something that no one used, which is frustrating. I kind of just wanted to check in again with folks. I know that like a lot of folks are new to Agile, which potentially means you've worked on projects kind of like that are more traditional. I'd love to learn a little bit from you all, like how has that gone? Like, have you had a lot of success? Has it been mixed? It's generally been not successful. And then if you're comfortable, I'd love to kind of hear like what has gone well or not gone well. Shilpa, thanks for sharing that like maintenance is really important with like a waterfall approach, like when you're maintaining something big that already exists. Thanks for sharing. So yeah, some folks have had like some success and then folks have had not a lot of success, not a lot of like perfect across all the board I'm seeing. But yeah, thanks for that point, Shilpa, about maintenance. Like it does make sense, like when you've got something that's working and out there, to kind of be a little bit more controlled and planned about how you make changes to that. I see that there's a weird yellow mark on my screen. I'm going to try fix that. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to try it. There's a yellow mark on my screen that I'm going to try remove. All right, is that better? Great. All right, I think that's better.
Sheel,
so yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Sasha.
You're not sharing.
Oh, I'm not sharing. There we go. All right, success. All right. Sorry about the interruption. I'll jump back in. So kind of like what I've seen and kind of how I think waterfall feels to a lot of folks is like, your projects are kind of either continually over budget or delayed. It takes a long time to fix bugs. It takes kind of forever to release anything, which is a very common problem with waterfall development. It always kind of feels like you're battling with your IT team or your vendor to like make changes and put through change requests. And it generally takes a lot of time to like write out the requirements. And at the end of the day, they're never perfect. So a lot of preamble to actually talk about what Agile is. So what is Agile? It's basically an approach and a philosophy where you're trying to listen to the people you're trying to serve, learn from your mistakes, and then kind of keep iterating and trying. And so in this kind of diagram here, you can see like what you want to do is you want to like design and build something small, release it, get it out in front of users, get their feedback, see if it's any good, and then kind of repeat. And that iteration and that repetition will help you quickly learn and improve what you have. And the goal of what this kind of lets you do is it lets you like, again, kind of learn quickly from people and kind of stop going down the wrong path. So you are able to test your assumptions, test your hypotheses quickly, and then change your approach. And then both like as a team and through your users, just learn about ways that you're working and learn from them to change your approach. It's not just like a set of processes, it's like a way of thinking and acting. So like the three things that I think about are like making sure that you're very open to learning from your users. So like doing something that you can use to learn from your end users, being open to new information and approaches. So like as you learn and hear things from your users and stakeholders and other people who you're testing your work with, like changing what you're doing, right? Like the reason you're putting stuff out there is to learn something to change or potentially change your approach. And then the third thing, which is really important, is like having a team that is empowered and collaborative. So that means kind of two things. So like giving a team a problem to solve versus a thing that they need to build is really important, because then once they're given a problem, they can use whatever tools and information and techniques that the team has to solve that problem. Like in a agile team, like good ideas, approaches come from anyone on the team. It's not a team where there's a single team lead or project lead who's just telling everyone else what to do, because then you're not kind of using the whole team's brain to solve your problem. So kind of just to give you a bit more of a concrete example of this, I'm going to kind of contrast agile and waterfall approaches to just taking a trip. So imagine you're trying to plan a family vacation and you want to go from Boston, where I'm based, to, let's say, San Francisco. In a waterfall approach to planning this great family trip, what you'd want to do is figure out every detail right at the start of the trip. So every meal, every hotel, every place you're going to stop to get gas, how long you're going to spend at every destination. And, you know, that could work if the world was perfect and you knew everything ahead of time, but that's just not the world we live in, right? Like there's going to be traffic delays, there's going to be weather issues. You might realize that like you want to spend more time somewhere than you'd originally planned, or you saw an interesting sign on the highway and you want to take a stop. But if you've got everything planned to the exact detail, anytime you change anything, it's going to have a huge impact on everything after that. And so it's just hard to be flexible. And kind of this approach means your trip is probably not going to be very successful. And then, you know, let's take an agile approach, which is how I think all of you probably think about planning your family trips. And so you might say, again, you know what, I have a trip I want to take from Boston to San Francisco, and you have a goal. So like maybe as a family, what you want to do is try out all the regional foods along the way, or maybe you want to see all the national parks, or maybe you have family along the way and you want to try visit all that family. And so you have some goal or thing that you're trying to achieve through this trip. And then you plan just the details that you're needed to kind of move forward, right? So you might plan a set of destinations, but you wouldn't plan all the meals, all the stops along the way, all the attractions, but you would have some way to make those decisions as a family, right? Like you probably wouldn't want to try to do everything that everyone in your family wants to do at every spot, because you'll exhaust yourselves and no one will be happy. So you'll have some way to prioritize and make decisions. Maybe it's every member in your family gets one choice at each destination on what they want to do, or maybe you kind of vote as a family on like together, what do we want to do all together, or maybe you split up, but you have some way to kind of decide what to do, right? And then your learning at every destination. So maybe you arrive at your hotel and there's a guide in the hotel that explains all the new attractions or events that are happening. So you'll learn from that to kind of decide what you want to do. And because you're a little bit more flexible here, as things change, you're able to adjust your plans and kind of get to your destination anyway. The other thing about Agile that is really, really important, and I'm going to come back to this, is like you're trying to constantly deliver value. And so this is a very contrived example, but it's a pretty classic example when you're talking about Agile. So imagine the problem I'm trying to solve is to make it easier to get to the grocery store, right? One way to solve this problem would be for me to say at the outset, like, we need to build a car. And what I'm going to do is put together a project plan to build a car. And that is a very traditional approach. So like you would build your first wheel, build your second wheel. You may decide you need to build 3 wheels, and then you put it all together. And then you would have a car at the end, which might be okay to get you to the grocery store. When you're working in an Agile fashion, it's a little different. What you want to do is every step along the way, you're trying to figure out a way to actually deliver something valuable that you're going to learn from. So you might start to say, okay, we want to get people faster to the grocery store. First thing we're going to build is a skateboard. And so we're going to build a skateboard, give it to people, let them go to the grocery store, and then we'll learn as they use the skateboard what to do next. So maybe after the skateboard, we realize, hey, the skateboard isn't fast enough. So we're going to build a bicycle instead. And it does kind of feel like you're throwing away what you did before to build the next thing, but you've learned a lot along the way and helped you kind of understand what the most important thing to do next is. So you built your bicycle, and then you might realize, hey, people need storage when they're going to the grocery store. So I'm going to build a scooter with a little storage on it. And then after that, you might say, okay, like we actually need more storage. So then we'll build the car. And so you've kind of learned along the way about what user needs are to get at the kind of outcome you care about. And this is a very, very contrived example, but this is kind of how we approach things when we work at 18F. So we I think last year worked with the VA on disability benefits. So if you're a veteran who incurs a disability due to your service, there are certain disability benefits and payments that you're eligible for through the VA. The process to get those benefits is pretty tough. Like there's a bunch of doctor's visits you need to do. There's a bunch of forms you need to fill out and mail or submit online. And it's just a lot of burden on someone to actually get access to these benefits. And there are a lot of disabilities and conditions that are eligible for this benefit. That's a big, gnarly problem. And we were kind of 18F was working with the VA to make this process faster and easier. And we could have done the kind of traditional approaches, looked at every condition and figured out a way to make that condition, figured out a single process for every potential condition to make it easier to get access to that benefit. What we did instead was we kind of looked at the problem and said, hey, we want to kind of test out some approaches. So we're going to focus on a couple of conditions. So hypertension was one of those conditions that are easy to diagnose using medical records. And we're going to really streamline the form and submission process around that so we can see if kind of pulling information from medical records to help with these diagnoses and access to these benefits actually makes it easier to access them for a veteran. And so we kind of really focused on that one problem and tested that out to make sure that would work. And now the team is now considering expanding into other conditions. So just kind of to summarize like how I think about Agile. So like it's always important to have that long-term goal and vision. Like, why are you doing this work? What are you trying to achieve? You want to kind of plan in really short increments to solve very specific problems. And then you want to learn from users and just people through early and continuous delivery. And so that's a lot of fancy words. It basically means you're putting stuff out there on a regular basis to get feedback from people. And then you want to kind of have small teams work on problems, not solutions. So you're not telling a team, build me something. You're telling a team, solve this problem for me. And then they can figure out the ways to actually solve that problem, which could involve process change or software development or something else. And then the thing that is really kind of interesting here is like solve the smallest possible problem. Like think about what the problems you have in front of you, find the smallest one, work on it, solve it, learn from how you solved it, and then just do it again and again and again. And if you keep doing that, you'll get to the thing you want to achieve. Kind of another way of looking at this. So I worked, my last job, the CTO at that company was the former US Chief Data Officer in the White House. And so this is kind of his approach, which is also a very agile way of looking at the world, and it's kind of how we function. So I'll just read this out. Dream in years, plan in months, evaluate in weeks, and ship daily. Prototype for 1x, build for 10x, engineer for 100x. What is required to cut the timeline in half? And then what needs to be done to double the impact? And so this is it's just a different way of thinking about working in an agile fashion. So the first kind of set of things around dreaming in years and then eventually to shipping daily is really about connecting a big picture plan and vision that you have, and then kind of planning and delivering and learning at the right kind of cadence. So you're not planning in years, you're planning for a couple months at a time, and you're learning every day. It's also about solving problems at the right level of complexity, right? So like if you're prototyping or testing some idea, you don't need to do anything too complicated. It's only when you're really like releasing something or scaling it that you need to spend engineering time to like lock down the process and to get the software right. And then the really important thing here is really about prioritization. So like thinking about like what can you do to actually get something out quicker? Like what can you cut out of your project scope? What can you not do to get something out there? Because getting anything out there is going to help you learn, and it's going to have more impact. Would you rather deliver something in 6 months that has some small amount of impact that you can learn from, or would you rather wait 2 years and deliver something else down the road, right? And you've missed that 1.5 years to actually have an impact with your users. And then the other thing is just around like thinking really about like what the most important actionable problems are to double the impact of your work. So does Agile actually work? I've talked a lot about it. I made it sound great, I hope. So, most modern software companies today work in an Agile fashion. Google actually releases stuff on an hourly basis, I believe. So like Google search is updated in some small way every hour. All the big software companies use Agile. There's an organization called Zippia that kind of assesses software projects. And so they looked at Agile projects versus waterfall projects, and they found that Agile projects are 1.5 times more likely to succeed. And then Agile projects are 25% more productive, the teams on those projects. Again, nothing is perfect, right? But Agile kind of moves you closer, or like shifts the odds in your favor. I can walk through a quick example that AT&F worked on with the Department of Justice, their civil rights division. So we're kind of brought in to kind of help the DOJ CRT, so that's the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, help the public submit complaints. And what they told us was filing complaints with the DOJ was a confusing and inconsistent experience for the public. So like one of the quotes from one of the interviews we did was like, somebody who was actually who was experiencing discrimination and trying to submit a complaint was like, I have to be calm, cool, and collected when I'm using this website, when all I really want to do is scream, and I want to do the least amount of work possible to actually submit my complaint, and that would be better. I'll show you what that kind of looks like. So before we start on this work, there was this giant page that you kind of had to scroll down and find the section within the DOJ that was appropriate for whatever you wanted to report about, and then find the appropriate link, and then go through page after page after page before you could actually submit your form, which is a really, really, really long form. And that was kind of on the public side. On the internal team side, like each CRT team was kind of really struggling with the complaints they were receiving because the intake process was so complicated. Different teams and sections within CRT were just getting complaints that they couldn't do anything about. And then their technology and tools were just like slowing down their processes. And so they were frustrated as well. And so kind of how we kind of approached it in agile fashion. So we spent a lot of time just learning about the process, the users, kind of both the public and internal CRT staff and what their pain points were. We actually did a lot of iteration and testing and prototyping of those forms with actual users. And then we really focused on specific problems that we thought would be valuable for end users and internal CRT staff to help solve their pain points first. So I'll show you some examples of that. So here is kind of the form. So on the far left is the original form, and then we did a bunch of prototyping. So we did something in Google Forms because that was quick and easy to test a form with. And then we built a couple of iterations before we got to a final, much easier to use form, in my opinion, to get there. And we worked with users. We kind of pushed out. We didn't push out to everyone, but we tested with real people these different versions of the form to see what makes sense. And then we were really cutthroat about picking and choosing what we did. So this was a complicated process of submitting complaints to the DOJ and then managing them. And so we really tried to focus on what was most important to do and actually do that and complete it and get people using it before we did more. So just here's an example of our roadmap. So there were a very specific set of things that we were doing. So on the public side, just recording and submitting a complaint. And then on the internal DOJ side, just viewing complaints that they received and then routing them to another team if it didn't make sense for them. And then there was a lot of other things that everyone wanted us to do that we plan to do in the future once we could verify that the base stuff that we wanted to do made sense and was valuable. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how to get started with Agile. And this is just kind of my way of thinking about Agile and the way I'd approach this. So I really think about starting with problems first. So when working on a project, I think about what is the problem that we're trying to solve, not the solution. So whether if your solution is a new process or a new software package or replacing an existing system, those are all solutions to solve some actual underlying problem that you have. And then I think a lot about how do I take that problem and then break it down into smaller and smaller problems. And then I can take a list of those problems and figure out, okay, which ones are the ones that make sense to solve first, to figure out what's the smallest problem I can solve that will have the highest impact and help me learn quickly. So an example, so imagine I was working on a replacement for a childcare subsidy application system, and I've seen RFPs for this. There are a lot of complicated solutions out there. You might want to build an external portal. You might want to build a payment system. You might want to build an internal case management system. You might want to have a mobile app. You might want to integrate the eligibility form for a childcare subsidy with your Medicaid and your SNAP eligibility forms. So there's a lot of complicated ways you could solve this problem and work on this area. But what an example of how to think about this is, in the childcare subsidy application world, what are the problems that I'm trying to solve? Is the problem that people are not discovering that they're eligible for these childcare subsidies? Is the problem that people are trying to apply for these subsidies and giving up because it's too difficult and time consuming, they need too many forms? Is the problem that it takes too long to get approved for a subsidy if I'm a family and I've already gone through the process of applying? And given each of those problems, there are different ways to solve and address those problems that don't necessarily involve replacing all of your childcare subsidy systems at once. You might decide, okay, the real problem is people aren't discovering that they're eligible for subsidies. So maybe we need to do some work with our public-facing website to just put the information out there and make it easier for people when they're Googling for the right terms to find our public website. The second thing is just practice delivering frequently. So this is hard and it's uncomfortable. But when you're working with vendors, for example, instead of asking them for progress reports, start to move to a world where you're asking them for actual outcomes of work that they've done, right? So ask them for if they have prototypes or tests or usability studies that they've done. Can I look at the feedback from that? Can I see a demo of something that you've actually done that I can go use? Can I see your learnings from user research? because those are like real things that the vendor has done that you can evaluate versus a progress report that says we are 25% of the way through our project plan. And then the other thing, which is a little bit more important, is kind of internally, like either personally or within your team, like getting comfortable sharing work early and often. I am very uncomfortable with this. And it took me a long time to kind of get this practice, but like building like kind of being comfortable sharing early drafts of work is really important. So for example, for preparing for this presentation, what I actually did was I wrote a Google document and I put some bullet points of the things I wanted to cover. And then I think I shared that with Kate, I shared that with Sasha, and I shared that with other people at our organization to get their initial feedback. Because that took me 15 to 20 minutes to write, and I learned, and people gave me feedback on that before I spent 2 hours building a presentation. And so like that kind of approach to just like share small early drafts of things to get early feedback on is really important, because that's what you're doing when you're working on an Agile team, and you really need to get comfortable with that. And then the other thing is like you have a problem, like you've picked a problem. It's really hard to get started. So like if you have any problem, whether that's like a process that you're trying to change, or you're trying to put together an RFP, like picking a problem that like a cross-functional team can go solve, and then having that team work together closely. I say ideally full-time. I know everyone has a full-time job already, so that is really a big ask. And so you could do this part-time, but like having that group of people work closely together and kind of try out these Agile methods, like trying to do things on a short cycle, sharing what they've learned, learning from that, and kind of going again and again, and then making sure the team is comfortable collaborating and sharing their ideas with each other versus having a single person in that team who's telling the rest of the team what to do. And there are a lot of small problems that you can pick to kind of test this out within your organizations. On the other side of the house, like if you're actually like managing and overseeing an Agile project, it can feel a little weird if you're very used to managing traditional projects, right? Like it might feel like you're losing control, right? Like you're saying, hey team, here's this problem I want you to solve. Please go solve it for me. And you don't know what they're going to do necessarily. And it also might feel like you don't know when they're going to be done, because they're kind of iterating and trying and having cycles to try to get to solve this problem. So you don't know when they'll actually be done. And so that can be really uncomfortable. Kind of what I've seen is like control in traditional projects. Like if you tell a team exactly all the things you need to do, if you give them all the requirements, it's not going to actually end up leading to what users actually need or to solve the problem that you care about solving. And then on the scheduling side, like I'm sure y'all have experienced this, like having a schedule in a big long schedule that's a 2-year schedule, it's just not accurate, right? Like you're giving yourself a false illusion of a schedule. And so having that schedule isn't getting you much. And kind of here's a kind of an illustration of that, right? So like from the, like you're working on a traditional project, like you start it, you have some plan you're getting to, and you just go in a straight line to get to that outcome. And you might get to what you wanted, you might not, you just followed your plan. In an Agile fashion, you see like you're doing something, you're finishing it, and then you're zigzagging around. But because you're doing that and you're learning at each step, you get to your final outcome, and you're likely doing something that you're actually happier with. But it's messier. So here's kind of what you can like expect when you're overseeing an Agile project, right? Like one thing that you'll see these things called roadmaps. So they're kind of like higher level plans that like communicate priorities that are like, here's what we're doing now, here's what we think we need to do next, and here's what we're going to do in the future. And those are going to change on a regular basis as your team learns, but at least they'll be clear things that you'll see that like, hey, over the next month, here's what my team is actually going to deliver, and I'll be able to learn from that. Which gets to the second point, which is like the team should be showing like outcomes through their work. Like they're not saying we're 10% of the way done to this project, or we're done half of the tasks we need to do. They'll say, hey, we might have like tried to revamp this process and we tested it with these other stakeholders and here's the feedback we got, or here's this prototype we built and here's the feedback we got, or here's this actual software that this vendor has developed and please go use it, test it so we can give them feedback early. And then the other interesting thing when you're kind of working on an Agile project is there's usually not like, there shouldn't be like a grand reveal or like everything comes together at the end kind of project completion, because ideally you've been seeing progress along the way and it's almost anticlimactic at the end, because everything kind of has worked. You've seen all the feedback and you've kind of already know that it's part of it is working at least, so that like at the end of the day, your project completion means, hey, we succeeded and we've felt good about it most of the way through. So actually, I saw that a few folks had actually worked on Agile teams before. Again, love to just kind of check in with y'all about like, how have Agile projects gone for you? Like, have they felt the same? Which I think somebody said earlier, we tried Agile, but we didn't like it. So we went back to the old way, or, you know, we've just talked about it. We haven't kicked off a project. Feel free to just chime in and chat. Yeah, Michelle, I actually am I would love to hear a little bit more about that when we get to Q&A, about just how it's felt the same. And then Melissa, yeah, we should talk through the details as well. Yeah, sounds like it was different. A few folks have had kind of feels kind of the same, which we've seen a lot of. Yeah, yeah, it's really common to try to take your waterfall approach and then just like make it agile by working in 2-week cycles, but you're not really changing your plan or how you learn along the way. And then Martin, yeah, I would love to hear what made you go back to the old way. That sounds super interesting. All right, so let's talk about good signs and bad signs, and hopefully I'll get to a little bit about like, hey, we tried Agile and it felt the same, and ways you could kind of combat that or change the way your team is working to avoid that. So here's kind of good signs on an Agile team. So like the whole team is kind of working together on solutions and ideas to solve your problem. Like if that's kind of your team is collaborating, using the whole team's brain is the way I think about it. You should be, and I talk about this from a software perspective, but like you should be doing something real every couple of weeks that you feel has added value and helped you learn. So this could be releasing your product every 2 weeks to production or to a test environment. It could be every 2 weeks doing some testing of your process changes or your RFP internally, and then updating that RFP and then doing it again every couple of weeks. You catch mistakes early and fix them quickly. And then you should change your plans along the way. If your plan was set at the outside and at the end of the day, it's still the same, then you probably aren't working in an Agile fashion. Some bad signs. So one person, so bad signs when you're working on an Agile team, if one person's making all the decisions, if you have too many inflexible deadlines, if things end up taking more than 2 weeks, if you're working with a vendor and you're just getting a lot of change requests and upcharges, or it just feels the same. And I'll talk to each of those. So if one person's making all the decisions, I think it's really around like, does the team, there's kind of 2 ways I think about it, right? Like, is there a problem that everyone on the team understands and is bought into solving? Or are they just kind of like just following through on a set of tasks to achieve a thing that they've been told to do? And then it's really about like how the team works together. Like the team kind of needs to be comfortable sharing their opinions, their approach. And then leaders on that team need to be open to that and to encourage that. Inflexible deadlines. This is hard. Like, we know deadlines exist. You cannot avoid them in some situations. What I think about is if you're running up to a deadline, you need to think about, like, what's the most important thing I need to do early so I don't put that deadline at risk. And so it might be, building some core piece of your workflow or some of your process to, like, get something basic working first before you get to your deadline, so that you're able to, by the time you get to your deadline, you'll be able to have something that's somewhat valuable, even if you don't get to everything you plan to do, which no one ever gets to. And then and this is kind of related, it's just like, try to do less than you originally planned, but do it before your deadline to drive the outcome you care about. So if there's something small you can do early, that will help achieve your outcome. If things end up taking more than 2 weeks, that just means that either, like, your tasks are too broad. So figure out how to take a given task and break it down into smaller tasks that you could actually complete in a couple of weeks that are kind of independently valuable, or kind of defining the tasks that your team is trying to do so that there's, like, a clear end result that you're aiming for. Like, an open-ended task is inevitably going to take more than 2 weeks. And then the thing that we commonly see is, like, in traditional projects, you, like, spend, traditionally you do requirements gathering very early in the process. What we've seen when people first start to do Agile is they'll replace that 6 months of requirements gathering with 6 months of user research. And that, again, is kind of just getting to the same problem, because what you're doing is just spending a lot of time figuring out what you need to do very early. When you really should be thinking about, like, we're going to do just enough user research to get started with something, and then we're going to do user research and prototyping and testing along the way every time we actually do something. Another bad sign is if you've just got a lot of change requests and upcharges from your vendors. That means there's something going on with your, like, contract relationship with your vendor. And we have a 18F has done a lot of work on procurement and contracting strategies on ways to avoid this, but, like, there are ways you can set up an agreement with a vendor so that they can work in a more agile fashion with you. And then if it feels the same, that typically what we see is, like, you say, we're just going to start doing Agile, and you just rename a bunch of meetings, and you take your existing project plan and you relabel it a roadmap, right? And I think that it's hard, right? It's hard to move away from the old way of working. I think you need to kind of think about, like, that project roadmap with deadlines really should be a priority list. Like, what's the most important thing to do now, and then not planning too far into the future. So things that you'll do next or in the future should be a lot more vague and a lot more open to being changed. It's a lot about, like, how the team works together. And so that team should be comfortable being collaborative. And it requires some amount of leadership from whoever's leading that team to enable that culture. And then the other thing that we've seen is, like, if it feels this way, ideally, if you're doing Agile, like, on every couple of weeks or every month, you're kind of revisiting how you work together and say, hey, is this working for us? What's been going well? What's been not going well? And having that level of discussion to kind of change how you work kind of will slowly move you to a more agile way of working. A couple of kind of takeaways and next steps, so just kind of a summary of what I've talked about. So I think in everything I've seen so far on the data and just my personal experience has been, like, agile projects and just smaller projects kind of more successful than big traditional projects. To start, if you want to start doing Agile, you really want to start small. So, like, you can't change an organization overnight from traditional to Agile. What I think about is picking one small team, one small project to try this out with, and seeing how it goes. Because what you'll learn is how well Agile works within your organization. What are the ways you need to adapt your processes and ways of working to enable that? Like, you're kind of being Agile and trying to implement Agile at your organization. And then the other thing is, like, just being more comfortable with a culture of sharing initial drafts, early work that you have to get feedback, because that's what you do when you're working on an Agile team. And like, if you're get more and more comfortable doing that, what I've seen is other people will then do the same with you, and it kind of builds that more collaborative, quickly learning, testing culture. But it is, a cultural shift. Like, you need to think about new ways of working. Like, just if somebody comes in and says, here, follow this process, follow this Scrum process, and when you, at the end of this, you will be Agile, like, that's not actually going to achieve the outcome that you're looking for. I would love to point out a bunch of courses that you could take to learn a little bit more about Agile. There are good ones out there. I can't actually recommend any of them since they're all kind of commercial, and I don't want to be putting 18F's name against any commercial software or commercial courses. But there's a couple of other things that would be helpful to look at. So 18F does have an Agile guide that's free that y'all can look at. We also have a state software handbook. So if you're actually doing a software procurement, a lot of our thinking about good ways to do this is in the state field guide. And I think it's pretty phenomenal. It talks about how you set up your contracts, the roles and teams that you have. And then there's actually a pretty long video series on digital.gov on foundations of Agile. And then if you have questions, we have an email address. Feel free to ping us after. I'm happy to chat about ways that we can help y'all. Any questions?
Sheel, do you want to go to the Q&A?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. If you want to just take down, Valeria, if you want to pause the recording.
I can stop the share.
And you can stop the share.